The contract was already signed when Marcus walked into the boardroom and told everyone I was being removed from the quantum encryption project. 6 years of weekends in the lab, missing family dinners, skipping hockey games with friends, all disappearing in one sentence. I had developed the core algorithm myself, filed the provisional patents under dual ownership, worked through holidays while everyone else vacationed in Banff. The room went silent. 12 executives stared at their laptops. Nobody defended me. Marcus said the international clients preferred someone more corporate, someone who better represented the company image. He didn't say gay, but everyone heard it. Sarah from marketing looked at her phone. David from operations suddenly needed coffee. I stood there in my Navy suit, the same one I wore when I pitched the project, watching my career dissolve. Then Marcus smiled and thanked me for my contributions. I waved back and said thank you too. Did he really think I would just disappear? I arrived at the office that morning expecting a promotion announcement. Instead, Marcus called me into the boardroom where the entire executive team sat waiting. He explained that the board decided to restructure the quantum project leadership. They wanted someone with a different profile for the international presentations. I asked what that meant. Marcus said they needed someone more aligned with corporate standards. The room felt colder than a January morning in Edmonton. One more thing. If you have ever been or felt judged just for being who you are, or know someone who went through that, the story will touch you, will want to follow it to the end. Subscribe and help give voice to stories that should no longer remain silent. My name is Cameron Mitchell, and I spent 6 years building the future of data security at NorthTech Solutions in Toronto. I was 34 when this story began, working as senior quantum research scientist in a glass tower near the Financial District. Every morning, I took the subway from my apartment in the Annex, grabbed coffee at the same shop on King Street, and arrived at my desk by 7:30. Most colleagues showed up around 9. The lab became my second home. I understood quantum entanglement and cryptographic algorithms better than anyone else in the building. My master's degree from the University of Waterloo and my doctorate from McGill meant nothing compared to the practical applications I developed. I could see patterns in quantum behavior that others missed. The technology I created could protect financial transactions, government communications, and healthcare data from any cyber attack. It was revolutionary, but being good at my job was never enough. There were always small comments, tiny moments that reminded me I was different. When I first joined the company, Roger from hardware engineering asked if I had a girlfriend. I said no. He asked again a month later. I said I was focused on work. He laughed and said I was probably too picky. I learned to smile and change the subject. In meetings, my ideas were often ignored until a straight colleague repeated them. I would suggest a technical approach, and people would nod politely. Then Kevin from operations would say the exact same thing 10 minutes later, and suddenly it was brilliant. I stopped fighting it. I documented everything in emails and reports, building a paper trail of my contributions. The dress code was never officially mentioned, but I noticed things. Other scientists wore jeans and hoodies. When I wore similar clothes, Linda from Human Resources pulled me aside and suggested I maintain a more professional appearance. I started wearing button-down shirts and dress pants. Then someone joked I looked like I was going to a wedding. I couldn't win. My voice was another issue. I don't have a deep, resonant voice. It's higher, clearer, and apparently that bothered people. During conference calls, clients sometimes asked if they could speak to the lead scientist instead. I was the lead scientist. Marcus would jump in and dominate the conversation, taking credit for my work while I sat there muted. The worst part was the social exclusion. Every Friday, the engineering team went to a sports bar downtown. They talked about hockey, UFC fights, and which women in the office were attractive. I was invited twice in 6 years. Both times, the conversation died when I arrived. They didn't know what to say to me. I didn't fit their idea of what a man should be. I ate lunch alone most days, working through technical problems while others gathered in the cafeteria. I told myself it didn't matter. The work mattered. The innovation mattered. But isolation weighs on you, especially when you spend 50 hours a week with people who barely acknowledge your existence. My family didn't understand why I stayed. My mother, who immigrated from Vancouver Island 30 years ago, kept asking why I didn't find a more welcoming workplace. My younger sister Emily said I deserved better. But I loved the science. I loved solving impossible problems. I believed my work would eventually speak louder than their prejudice. Then I met Owen at a quantum computing conference in Montreal. He was a venture capitalist from Vancouver, charming and confident in ways I never was. We talked about entanglement theory over coffee, then dinner, then breakfast. He understood both the technology and the business potential. He saw what I was building and got excited about it. Owen started visiting Toronto every few weeks. We kept our relationship private. I never mentioned him at work. The fear of being discovered felt like carrying a weight everywhere. I imagined the jokes, the discomfort, the way people would suddenly treat me differently. So I compartmentalized. At work, I was the quiet scientist. With Owen, I could finally breathe. He encouraged me to think bigger. He said I was wasting my talent making other people rich. He talked about patents, licensing deals, and the real value of intellectual property. I started paying more attention to the legal fine print in my employment contracts. I realized that while NorthTech owned anything I developed using their resources, there were gray areas. Ideas conceived outside work hours, preliminary research done on personal equipment, provisional patents filed independently. I began working from my apartment on weekends, using my own laptop and open source tools. I developed the core quantum encryption algorithm outside the office, documenting everything with timestamps and independent backups. The breakthrough came in a Sunday morning while Owen was making pancakes. I saw how to stabilize quantum states for commercial applications. It was elegant, revolutionary, and entirely mine. Monday morning, I brought the refined concept to NorthTech. I positioned it as an extension of our existing research, but the foundation belonged to me. I filed a provisional patent application listing both myself and NorthTech as co-owners, which was technically correct since I would be using their labs to finalize the prototype. Marcus approved without reading the details carefully. Over the next 18 months, I built the prototype. I worked late nights and weekends, perfecting the technology while my colleagues went home to their families. Owen supported me through the exhaustion, reminding me this would all be worth it. The quantum encryption system worked flawlessly. It was exactly what governments and financial institutions needed. Then the international interest began. A consortium of European banks contacted NorthTech about licensing the technology. Marcus suddenly paid attention. He scheduled meetings, brought in lawyers, and started talking about a $50 million deal. My name appeared in the technical documentation, but Marcus positioned himself as the project leader in all external communications. I didn't fight it initially. I wanted the technology deployed. I wanted to prove it worked. But during a video call with the German banking representatives, one of them specifically asked to speak with the lead developer. Marcus said he would handle the technical questions. They insisted. Reluctantly, he unmuted me. I explained the quantum architecture in detail, answering their complex questions about error correction and security protocols. They were impressed. After the call, Marcus told me I did well, but should let him handle client relationships going forward. He said I was too technical, that clients preferred talking to someone who understood business strategy. That was when I knew. No matter what I accomplished, I would always be kept in the background. I was useful for the science, but not acceptable for the presentation. My competence was valuable, but my presence was embarrassing. They wanted my brain, not my face. 3 months after the German banking call, Owen's firm connected me with an American defense contractor interested in quantum encryption. They wanted to meet the developer personally. This was different from the European banks. These were serious players with massive budgets and urgent security needs. The potential contract was worth $200 million over 5 years. Marcus saw the opportunity immediately. He scheduled a presentation in Washington for the following month. He put together a team of 8 people to attend, including himself, 3 sales executives, 2 lawyers, and 2 engineers. I was not on the list. I walked into his office and asked why I wasn't included. Marcus leaned back in his expensive chair and said the client wanted a polished presentation, not a technical deep dive. I reminded him they specifically asked to meet the developer. He said Kevin from operations could handle the technical questions. Kevin barely understood quantum mechanics. I pushed back harder than I ever had before. I said this was my technology, my innovation, my 6 years of work. Marcus's expression shifted from dismissive to cold. He told me to watch my Tony. He said I was part of a team, and team players don't make demands. He suggested I focus on supporting the pitch from Toronto rather than complicating the client relationship with my presence. I left his office shaking. Owen was visiting that week, and I told him everything that night. He was furious but strategic. He reminded me about the patent structure, about the provisional applications, about the documentation I had maintained. He said I had options, but I needed to play this carefully. The Washington presentation happened without me. Marcus sent me a brief email afterward saying it went well. No details, no acknowledgement of my contribution. 2 weeks later, the contract was delayed because the client wanted additional technical validation. They wanted to meet the actual developer, not the sales team. This time, Marcus couldn't avoid including me. He scheduled a follow-up meeting in Toronto, bringing the defense contractor representatives to our office. He prepared me like I was a child, telling me to stick to the technical script, avoid unnecessary details, and let him handle any business questions. The meeting was supposed to be 2 hours. It lasted 6. The American engineers asked sophisticated questions about quantum decoherence, error rates, scalability, and security vulnerabilities. I answered everything fluently, drawing diagrams on the whiteboard and walking them through the mathematics. Marcus sat silently, completely out of his depth. After the technical session, the lead contractor, a woman named Patricia, asked to speak with me privately. Marcus tried to join us, but she politely excluded him. In a small conference room, she told me the technology was exactly what they needed. She said her team was impressed by my knowledge and wanted to move forward quickly. Then she asked about the development timeline and intellectual property structure. I explained my role carefully, mentioning the provisional patents and ownership arrangement. Patricia took notes and said her lawyers would review everything. She shook my hand and said they would be in touch directly. Marcus was suspicious when I came out of that meeting. He asked what we discussed. I said she wanted technical clarifications. He didn't believe me, but he couldn't prove anything. Over the next few weeks, Patricia's team sent detailed questions directly to my work email, bypassing Marcus entirely. This was when things became hostile. Marcus started excluding me from meetings about the quantum project. He moved my desk to a smaller office away from the main lab. He assigned Kevin to supervise my work, which was absurd since Kevin didn't understand the technology. When I protested to human resources, they said it was a routine organizational restructuring. The microaggressions intensified. Roger from hardware engineering made a joke about me being too sensitive during a team lunch. Sarah from marketing said the company needed people with strong presence for client-facing roles, looking directly at me. David from operations suggested I might be happier in a pure research position without business responsibility. I started hearing whispers. Someone told Emily, my sister, that people at my office were saying I wasn't corporate material. Another colleague mentioned that Marcus was telling executives I was difficult to work with, that I had attitude problems and didn't collaborate well. None of it was true, but perception became reality. Owen visited more frequently, worried about my mental state. I was exhausted, angry, and scared. I had invested everything into this technology, and they were erasing me. I couldn't sleep. I stopped going to the gym. I ate takeout alone in my apartment while Owen tried to convince me to fight back. Then Patricia called my cell phone directly on a Thursday evening. She said her team completed their evaluation and wanted to move forward with a $350 million contract over 7 years. But there was a complication. Their lawyers discovered the patent ownership structure and had concerns about Northtech stability. They wanted assurance that the developer would remain involved regardless of corporate politics. I told her I couldn't guarantee anything. I explained my situation carefully, without revealing too much. Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said her company valued innovation and the people who created it. She suggested we continue the conversation through proper channels, but wanted me to know they were serious about working with the actual inventor. That conversation changed everything. I realized I had leverage. The technology only worked because I understood it completely. Kevin couldn't maintain it. Marcus couldn't explain it. Without me, they had incomplete documentation and a prototypathy barely understood. I started preparing. I copied all my personal research files, the ones created outside work hours on my own equipment. I organized my documentation of the provisional patents. I backed up emails showing my contributions and the timeline of development. I created a detailed technical manual that only I could fully comprehend. Owen connected me with an intellectual property lawyer in Vancouver. We had long video calls reviewing my employment contracts, patent applications, and development timeline. The lawyer said I had a stronger position than I realized. The provisional patents were legally filed as co-ownership. The core algorithm was developed partially outside work hours. Northtech had rights to the implementation, but I had rights to the foundational concept. Meanwhile, Marcus scheduled an all-hands meeting to announce the American defense contract. He presented it as his achievement, barely mentioning my name. He talked about Northtech's innovation and leadership in quantum technology. He said this contract would transform the company. He thanked the team for their hard work, looking at everyone except me. After the meeting, several colleagues avoided me. They knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to get involved. I was becoming invisible, erased from my own creation. That night, I told Owen I was ready to do something drastic. He smiled and said he had been waiting for me to reach that conclusion. The next 4 months were brutal. Marcus demanded constant updates on the quantum system refinements needed for the defense contract. I worked 16-hour days, missing dinners with Owen, skipping calls with my family, surviving on coffee and determination. I traveled twice to Washington for technical validations, always accompanied by Marcus or Kevin, never allowed to speak freely with Patricia's team. The technology performed perfectly. Every test exceeded expectation. The American engineers were thrilled. Patricia sent emails praising the innovation and asking detailed questions about scalability. I answered everything thoroughly, building a relationship with their technical team while Marcus handled the business negotiations. But something was shifting at Northtech. Marcus started having closed-door meetings with the board of directors. He brought in external consultants to evaluate the quantum program. He reorganized the research division, moving me to a role he called Special Technical Advisor, which sounded important but had no actual authority. Owen noticed before I did. He saw the pattern. Marcus was positioning himself as the irreplaceable leader while making me expendable. Owen warned me to protect myself, but I was too exhausted to think strategically. I just wanted to finish the project and prove my value. Then came the international presentation. The defense contract required approval from a Canadian government oversight committee before final signing. Northtech needed to demonstrate that the quantum technology met national security standards and export regulation. This was the biggest presentation of my career, the moment to prove everything. Marcus announced the presentation team 2 weeks before the event. Himself, Kevin, 3 lawyers, 2 executives, and a government relations specialist. My name was not included. I walked into his office and demanded an explanation. Marcus closed the door and told me to sit down. He said the board reviewed my performance and had concerns. They felt I lacked the professional presence needed for high-stakes government precedent. They worried about my communication style, my appearance, my ability to represent Northtech at the highest levels. They wanted someone more polished, more conventional, more representative of corporate values. I asked what that meant. Marcus looked uncomfortable but continued. He said the committee members were traditional, conservative, and expected a certain type of leadership. He said I was a brilliant scientist, but not the right face for this kind of partnership. He said it wasn't personal, just business reality. I understood exactly what he meant. I wasn't straight enough, masculine enough, normal enough. My competence didn't matter. My 6 years of innovation didn't matter. I existed in the background, useful but invisible, valuable but unacceptable. I asked who would present the technical material. Marcus said Kevin studied my documentation and could handle basic questions. For complex issues, they would submit written responses after the meeting. I laughed. Kevin couldn't explain quantum entanglement to a high school physics class. Marcus became defensive. He said I was being difficult again, proving why I wasn't suitable for client-facing roles. He said my attitude was exactly the problem. He suggested I take some time off, let the team handle the presentation, and focus on supporting documentation. He made it sound like a generous offer. I walked out of his office knowing my time at Nortec was over. Either I would leave on my terms or they would push me out. That night, Owen flew in from Vancouver without warning. He found me in my apartment, staring at my laptop, too angry to think clearly. Owen held me and let me process the rage. Then he asked a simple question. Did I want revenge or justice? I said I wanted both. He smiled and pulled out his laptop. He had been working on something, a backup plan he hoped we would never need. Owen's venture capital firm had connections with TechVantage Industries, a major quantum computing company based in Calgary. They were Nortec's biggest competitor, better funded and more aggressive. Owen had quietly shared information about my situation with their chief technology officer months ago, just as a contingency. TechVantage was very interested in both me and my technology. They understood the patent structure, the developmental, and the leverage I had. They were prepared to make an offer, but it needed to happen quickly, before the government presentation locked everything down. I spent 3 days reviewing options with Owen and his lawyers. The provisional patents were solid. The core algorithm belonged to me as much as Nortec. The implementation could be replicated with proper documentation. I had every email, every research note, every technical specification backed up independently. Owen suggested I resign immediately and take the TechVantage offer. I said no, I wanted Marcus to fire me. I wanted the rejection documented officially. I wanted them to own their prejudice publicly. So I went to the office Monday morning and requested a meeting with Marcus and the head of human resources. I brought printed copies of every email showing my contributions, every patent application, every client communication praising my work. I laid them on the table and asked directly if I was being removed from the project due to my performance or other factors. Marcus tried to redirect. He talked about team dynamics and corporate strategy. I pressed harder. I asked if my technical competence was questioned. He said no. I asked if my work quality was insufficient. He said no. I asked then what exactly made me unsuitable for representing the company. Marcus became flustered. The HR director, a woman named Jennifer, intervened. She said the company valued my contributions but needed to make personnel decisions based on various factors. I asked her to name those factors. She couldn't. I stood up and said I understood perfectly. I told them I would not resign, but I would not pretend this was about performance. I said if they wanted me gone, they would need to fire me and document their reasoning. Then I walked out. 2 days later, Jennifer called me into her office. Marcus was there with a lawyer. They had a termination letter prepared. The stated reason was organizational restructuring and position elimination. The severance package was minimal, barely covering 3 months' salary. They wanted me to sign immediately. I read the document carefully. It included a non-compete clause preventing me from working on quantum encryption for 2 years. It required me to transfer all intellectual property rights to Nortec. It included a non-disparagement agreement preventing me from discussing my termination publicly. I told them I needed time to review with my lawyer. Marcus said the offer expired in 24 hours. I smiled and said that was fine. I left the building carrying a box with my personal items, 6 years of work reduced to a cardboard container. Owen was waiting in his car outside. I got in and started laughing. He looked worried until I explained. They had just made the biggest mistake of their corporate lives. By firing me before the government presentation, before the contract was finalized, they had created a gap. And I was about to fill it with something they never saw coming. That night, I signed a contract with TechVantage Industries, not as an employee, but as an independent consultant and patent holder. They paid me $2 million upfront for exclusive access to my quantum encryption knowledge and the rights to develop competing technology based on my provisional patents. Then I called Patricia at the defense contractor. I explained my situation carefully, professionally, without emotion. I told her I was no longer with Northtech, but remained committed to the quantum encryption project. I said I had partnered with TechVantage and could provide the same technology with better support, faster development, and direct access to the actual inventor. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if I could guarantee the same performance specifications. I said I could guarantee better performance because I would be leading the development personally, not watching from the sidelines while someone else took credit. She said her team would need to evaluate the situation. I sent her a detailed technical proposal that night, showing how TechVantage could deliver everything Northtech promised, with me as the lead scientist. Owen's firm backed the proposal with financial guarantees and development timeline commitments. The government presentation happened 3 days later. Kevin fumbled through my slides, unable to answer basic technical questions. Marcus tried to cover, but the committee members grew frustrated. They asked repeatedly to speak with the actual developer. Marcus admitted I was no longer with the company, but insisted the technology was secure. One committee member asked if Northtech retained full patent rights. Marcus confidently said yes. That was when everything collapsed. The committee's lawyers had already reviewed the provisional patents. They knew about the co-ownership structure. They knew I had left. They questioned whether Northtech could deliver without the primary inventor. The government approval was delayed indefinitely pending legal review. The defense contract fell into limbo. Northtech stock dropped 8% when news leaked about development complications. Marcus faced angry board members demanding explanations. Meanwhile, Patricia's team completed their evaluation of my TechVantage proposal. They liked it. They liked the direct access to me, the clearer intellectual property structure, the faster development timeline. They requested a formal pitch meeting. I spent 2 weeks preparing with TechVantage's team. We refined the technology, improved the specifications, and created a comprehensive presentation. Owen coached me on the business aspects, helping me understand the strategic value beyond just the science. The pitch meeting was in Ottawa, at the defense contractor's Canadian headquarters. I presented alone, no handlers, no managers taking credit. Just me and my technology. I explained the quantum encryption architecture, demonstrated the prototype, answered every technical question completely. I was confident, clear, and passionate about the innovation. Patricia's team approved the contract that afternoon, subject to final legal review. The value had increased to $400 million over 7 years with an option for extension. I would be the lead scientist with guaranteed involvement throughout the entire contract period. I walked out of that meeting knowing I had won. Not just the contract, but my dignity, my recognition, my right to exist fully in my own success. Owen was waiting outside, and I kissed him right there in the parking lot, not caring who saw. The next 10 days moved quickly. TechVantage's lawyers worked with Patricia's team to finalize the defense contract. I provided technical specification, development timelines, and security protocols. Everything was documented thoroughly, professionally, and entirely legally. But I had one more move prepared. During my time at Northtech, I had discovered something troubling in the company's financial records. While working late one night, I needed to access the research budget files to justify equipment purchases. I accidentally opened the wrong folder and found expense reports that didn't make sense. Marcus had been billing personal trips as business expenses, vacations to Whistler listed as client meetings, dinners at expensive restaurants charged to the quantum project budget, equipment purchases that never arrived in the lab. Over 18 months, I found almost $200,000 in questionable expenses. I had saved copies of everything on my personal encrypted drive, not knowing if I would ever need them. Now I knew exactly what to do. I compiled the evidence carefully, highlighting patterns and documenting dates. Then I sent an anonymous report to Northtech's board of directors, copying the Financial Oversight Committee and the external auditors. The investigation began quietly. Auditors reviewed expense reports, interviewed department heads, and examined budget allocations. Marcus initially dismissed it as routine compliance checking, but the questions became more specific, more uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the defense contract with TechVantage was publicly announced. The press release highlighted the innovative quantum encryption technology, the Canadian government partnership, and the $400 million value. My name appeared prominently as lead scientist and co-inventor. Northtech's executive saw the announcement. Marcus called me immediately, furious and desperate. He left 3 voicemails threatening legal action for breach of contract, theft of intellectual property, and corporate sabotage. I didn't respond. My lawyers did. They sent a formal letter explaining the provisional patent structure, the development timeline outside work hours, and the legal right to pursue independent contracts. They noted that Northtech had terminated my employment before any exclusive agreements were finalized. They included copies of Marcus's own emails admitting the termination was not performance-related. The letter also mentioned that we were aware of ongoing financial investigations at Northtech and hoped those matters would be resolved appropriately. Marcus would understand the implication immediately. The media picked up the story. Technolojournals wrote about the engineer who lost his job and won a bigger contract with a competitor. Business reporters analyzed the intellectual property dispute and the complexities of patent co-ownership. Some articles mentioned that the engineer had been pushed out despite being the primary inventor. Northtech's reputation began crumbling. The delayed government approval became public knowledge. Investors questioned the company's ability to deliver advanced technology without key personnel. Partners requested meetings to discuss project stability. Then the financial investigation results came out. The board of directors held an emergency meeting and announced that Marcus was placed on administrative leave pending review of expense irregularities. They discovered not just his personal expense fraud, but also that he had been inflating project budgets and pocketing the difference through a consulting company he owned. The total fraud exceeded $600,000 over 3 years. Marcus had been systematically stealing from the company while taking credit for my innovation. The board fired him immediately and referred the case to law enforcement. But it got worse for Northtech. During the investigation, auditors discovered that Kevin, whom Marcus promoted to replace me, had been falsifying technical reports. He claimed to understand systems he couldn't actually operate. He had been copying my documentation and presenting it as his own analysis. When the defense contractor's technical team contacted him for clarifications, he provided incorrect information that could have compromised security protocols. The Government Oversight Committee learned about these problems and revoked Northtech's preliminary approval entirely. The defense contract was officially canceled. The company's quantum division was shut down. Shareholders filed lawsuits. 3 executives resigned. The business press covered everything. Articles detailed the corporate dysfunction, the financial fraud, and the loss of a transformative contract. Some reporters investigated deeper and found former employees willing to discuss the toxic work environment. Stories emerged about discrimination, favoritism, and talented people pushed out for not fitting corporate culture. One journalist discovered my termination timeline and started asking questions. Why was the lead inventor fired right before the biggest presentation? What were the real reasons for his departure? She interviewed people at the company who spoke anonymously about the prejudice, the microaggressions, the deliberate exclusion. The article published in a major Canadian business magazine. It didn't name me directly, but everyone in the industry knew who it was about. It described a brilliant scientist marginalized for being different, for not matching the straight masculine corporate image, for threatening insecure executives with his competence. The article included quotes from Patricia at the defense contractor. She said her team specifically wanted to work with the actual inventor, not corporate managers. She said technical excellence and integrity mattered more than fitting traditional stereotypes. She mentioned that her company valued diversity and innovation over conformity. Northtech's board issued a public apology for the failures in leadership and oversight. They announced new policies on discrimination, financial controls, and employee treatment. They admitted mistakes were made in personnel decisions. It was too little too late. Meanwhile, my work with TechVantage accelerated. I hired a team of young scientists, many of them women and minorities who had felt excluded elsewhere. We created a lab culture based on merit, creativity, and respect. I made sure everyone's contributions were recognized publicly. The quantum encryption system evolved rapidly with proper support and resources. We exceeded the defense contract specifications ahead of schedule. Patricia's team was thrilled. They requested additional applications for other government agencies. Owen's venture capital firm invested heavily in the quantum division. Other investors followed. Within 6 months, TechVantage's quantum unit became the most valuable part of the company. My portion of the equity made me wealthy beyond Anathingi had imagined working for Northtech. But the real victory came from an unexpected source. A major European telecommunications company contacted me directly about licensing the quantum encryption technology for civilian applications. They had followed the story, understood the innovation, and wanted to partner with the actual inventor. The licensing deal took 3 months to negotiate. The European company offered a structure where I retained partial ownership of the core patents while they funded global development and deployment. The initial payment was $200 million, with ongoing royalties projected to reach billions over the next decade. But they added one unique requirement. They wanted to publicize the partnership as an example of valuing innovation regardless of who creates it. They wanted to use the story to promote diversity in technology, showing that brilliant minds come in all forms. They asked if I was comfortable being identified publicly as a gay scientist who had overcome discrimination to achieve success. I discussed it with Owen for hours. Being publicly out meant exposing myself to criticism, hatred, and judgment. But it also meant being visible, real, and honest. It meant other young LGBTQ scientists could see someone like them succeeding. I agreed. The press conference in Brussels was covered internationally. I stood beside the telecommunication CEO and explained the quantum encryption technology in simple terms. Then I talked about my journey, the obstacles, the prejudice, and the determination to prove my worth. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from young engineers and scientists who had felt invisible in their workplaces. Universities invited me to speak about inclusion in STEM fields. Technology companies contacted me about consulting on diversity and innovation. Marcus, meanwhile, faced criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Kevin was fired and struggled to find work after his falsification of reports became known. Northtech stock never recovered. The company eventually sold its remaining assets to a competitor and dissolved. I never spoke to Marcus again. I didn't need to. The silence was my statement. I had moved forward while he collapsed under the weight of his own corruption and prejudice. He had bet that I was disposable, that my difference made me weak. He was catastrophically wrong. The settlement from Northtech's corporate insurance came 18 months later. They paid me $9 million to resolve potential discrimination claims and intellectual property disputes. I donated half to organizations supporting LGBTQ youth in STEM education. Owen and I moved to a house in the Rockies, splitting time between Calgary and Vancouver. I continued leading the quantum research team remotely, building the technology that would define the next generation of digital security. We got married in a small ceremony with family and close friends. The patent portfolio I developed became the foundation for an entire industry. The value exceeded $1.4 billion when a consortium of tech companies purchased licensing rights for global deployment. I retained partial ownership, ensuring ongoing involvement in the technology's evolution. I never forgot the people who helped me, especially Patricia, who saw beyond corporate prejudice to recognize real innovation. I never forgot the people who tried to erase me, but I chose not to let that define my story. Instead, I focused on building something bigger than revenge. I created opportunities for other marginalized scientists. I proved that excellence comes in many forms. I showed that being different isn't a weakness, but a perspective that drives innovation. Looking back now, I understand that the hardest part was never the science. Quantum mechanics, complex algorithms, technical challenges. I could solve those. The hardest part was believing I deserved to be recognized and valued exactly as I am. The prejudice tried to convince me I was the problem, that I needed to hide or change to be acceptable. But the truth is simpler. I was always enough. My competence was never the question. Their bigotry was the limitation, not my identity. Every microaggression, every exclusion, every moment they tried to make me invisible, they were revealing their own weakness, not mine. I learned that you can't compromise yourself into acceptance from people who are determined to diminish you. Success isn't just achieving your goals. Success is refusing to disappear, refusing to shrink, refusing to accept that you're different status quo your excellence. I built technology that will protect data for decades. But the real victory was protecting myself, my dignity, and my right to exist fully in my own achievements. That matters more than any contract value. If my story inspired you, if you have ever felt diminished or know someone who has been, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Here, we share real stories of overcoming and resistance. And if you have your own story of conquest against prejudice, share it in the comments. Your experience can inspire someone going through a similar situation. Remember, your value is not defined by others' prejudice. Your talent is greater than any barrier they try to put in your path. And sometimes the best revenge is simply being who you are without apologizing. Thank you for watching, and until the next story, which will be even more impactful.